and the politics of public education, and also have been involved in that since elementary school. Just this past December in 2022, I was admitted under the early action program to Harvard's class of 2027. And at Harvard, I plan to major in economics with a secondary in computer science. Also, in the Canadian admission cycle, as was mentioned, I won over $300,000 worth of scholarships in Canada, including the Loran Scholarship and a full scholarship to the University of Toronto. I want to start by thanking Maria Xiaozhang and Victoria Training Center for having me today, and also to everyone for taking the time out of their weekend to join this webinar. Before I get started with the main content, I just want to preface that just because I was admitted to Harvard doesn't mean that I was the smartest applicant. In fact, I know I wasn't the smartest. Doesn't mean that I was the most talented applicant, and it doesn't mean that I was the best applicant by all measures. However, I hope that my experience can serve as encouragement that you don't need to be a once-in-a-generation student to be accepted into the best schools in the world. If you can create a compelling application, you have a very good chance. In the admissions process, whether that's in Canada or the United States, there is a large element of luck, and I happen to be what they were looking for this cycle. I like to say that everybody who gets in, no matter how good you are, has some element of luck on their side, and I definitely did. When it comes to US top university admissions, as well as scholarships in Canada, there's no such thing as one size fits all advice. So just because I did something or because I recommend something doesn't mean that it's something that you have to do. Vice versa, just because I recommend against something doesn't mean that you can't do it. So I guess take everything I say with a grain of salt. So today, we'll be talking about specifically how to apply to top universities in the United States as an international student. So we'll look a little bit at what applying as an international student means. How does that change the application process for you, as well as finding the right schools, financial aid, course selection in high school for top university admissions, as well as standardized testing, more specifically the SAT. And then also sort of how do you pick and deepen your exploration of different activities and extracurriculars during high school, as well as application and preparation timelines, especially if you're thinking of applying to top US universities and you're already in high school, maybe you're already in grade 11. There are a bunch of timelines that you're going to want to abide by in order to provide yourself with the greatest chance and the greatest amount of time to present the best application. As Maria Xiaozhang mentioned, I don't have a separate slide for scholarships. However, I like to say that for big scholarships in Canada, the process for obtaining those and for winning those scholarships is very similar to the process of applying to top US universities or very competitive universities. So just throughout the webinar, a lot of connections will be drawn between the US admissions process and top scholarship admissions in Canada. So being that most of the audience here is Canadian, this webinar is tailored towards Canadians. And as a Canadian applicant, if you are a Canadian citizen, you are considered an international student. The process of applying as an international student to top US universities is quite different from the process of applying as a domestic student. And that process as an international student also varies from school to school. So for an international student applying to Harvard, that process might look a little different than an international student applying to Stanford, for example. So the biggest difference is in terms of numbers. At the undergraduate level, most top US universities have a maximum allotment of spots that they're able to fill with international students. For example, in the Ivy League, the percentage of admitted students who are international sits at around 12%. Therefore, a school like Princeton and Harvard that admit around 1,800 students each year will only have enough space for about 200 international students, so significantly fewer seats. In reality, many of those 200 seats, for example, in the case of Harvard or Princeton, will be filled by people like recruited athletes, the children of celebrities, and the children of large donors. So the actual number of spots available for international students is actually even lower than the already low number. And another thing to remember is that these 200 seats, for example, are not 200 spots for Canadian students. They are 200 spots for students from the rest of the world. I will say that as an international student, the best country to be from is Canada, for most top schools. Since our primary language of instruction over here is also English, you don't have to worry about taking the TOEFL or any other English proficiency exam. Diplomatically, Canada and the US have a great relationship, so entering the country on a student visa isn't very difficult. For example, for Harvard, I recently got my visa. All they did was send me a form. I just had to go online, register, and pay a fee. And then when I go to the border, I just have to give them that form. I didn't have to go to the embassy or anything. It was very simple. And that's not a luxury that students from a bunch of different countries have. So most schools don't release hard data on the number of undergraduate students admitted from specific countries. However, MIT is one of the few schools that does. If you take a look at the photo, data provided by MIT's registrar shows that there are only 13 Canadians across all 4 undergraduate years. So this doesn't mean that there are 13 in one class. There are 13 across all 4 undergraduate classes at MIT. So that's about 3 Canadian admits every year, which is not a lot at all. Whereas China has around 88 students, or roughly 20 admits each year at the undergraduate level. And then a country, Chile, has 0. So MIT is pretty brutal for Canadians. Taking these numbers into account, for example, I didn't apply to MIT. Do I like MIT? Yeah, I think it's a great school, but I didn't think my chances were too good. And even now, knowing that I was accepted to Harvard, and this is something that I will talk about later, I still don't believe that I would have been admitted to MIT, and that's due to something called FIT, which is what I'll talk about in a bit. However, some other top schools are more generous. It's estimated that UPenn and Brown accept around 30 Canadians each year. And Canadians are actually the largest group of international students at a significant number of these top US universities and Ivy Leagues. Obviously, these are less than favorable numbers, and they show the importance of crafting an effective application and one that will help you stand out. I will also say that the number of Canadians skyrockets when you look at graduate programs. Again, if you look at the table, there are over 200 Canadians in graduate programs at MIT. So if you decide that you want to go to a top school in the US, no matter what, even if you can't attend for undergrad, you will definitely be able to later on if you are determined and you are accomplished. So something that I just mentioned was the idea of fit. Just like the admissions process, American schools are completely different to schools in Canada. In Canada, you can probably list a majority of top schools on one hand. So you have University of Toronto, Queen's, Waterloo, McGill, Western. You could probably throw some other schools there in the mix, but I can fit most of them on one hand. In the US, however, there are so many great schools. You have the 8 Ivies, Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, Duke, Northwestern, U Chicago, Caltech. The list just goes on forever and ever and ever. So when you have all of these options, how do you choose? So a term that you will often hear used in top university admissions is fit. Its meaning is quite literally, how do you fit in with the school? You should ask yourself, will the school meet my academic needs? Will it meet my needs outside of the classroom? And will it help me reach my personal and professional goals? I remember that when I first heard about fit, I thought that it was irrelevant. I just wanted to go to the best school. However, once you get high up in the school ranks, it's all subjective. You know, who's to say that Harvard is better than Stanford or that Yale is better than Princeton? And these rankings change every year. So there is no objectively best school. There is, however, a school that is the best for you. And that school is oftentimes the school that you actually have the best chance of getting into. Now, even if you don't personally care about the idea of fit, the universities that you are applying to do. Again, it comes down to the numbers. For example, last year, the University of Toronto admitted roughly 17,000 undergraduates. Since they admit so many people, they're able to take every single student who is qualified, or nearly every student who is qualified. However, when it comes to a school like Princeton that only takes 1,700 students as opposed to 17,000 students, simply being good enough is not enough. Since these top schools get so many great applicants, they would be able to fill their entire class, like Princeton's 1,700 students, many times over with very qualified applicants, but they don't. When admissions officers read your profile, of course, they're looking to see if you are academically ready and if you have engaged yourself outside of the classroom. However, they're also looking to see if you would fit in with the school. They want to see if you match the culture and the environment, and if they think that you will actually enjoy your time there. Fit is something that's pretty hard to fake in this process, and oftentimes it's what differentiates you from the pool of otherwise equally qualified individuals. With that in mind, conducting thorough school research is absolutely crucial. And before I get into this, school research is a lot more than just looking at, okay, what schools are ranked the highest. So before you apply anywhere, you must craft a school list. Many of these schools have a bunch of required supplemental materials, and it's simply unrealistic to apply to every single top school. You might think that applying to only 4 top US universities is a relatively low amount of work. However, if you applied this year to Yale, Stanford, Columbia, and Princeton, just those 4 schools together would require over 28 supplementary essays. 28. Yes, these schools have significantly more essays than most schools. Harvard, for example, has 3 supplementary essays, and some of those 28 essays will be very short. Regardless, 28 is still a huge number, and that's a lot of work that you'll have to balance with things like extracurriculars, your course load in grade 12, and Canadian university applications. I recommend creating a school list with around 10 schools. 10 is a ballpark figure, not a hard maximum or minimum. For example, I did not apply to 10. I applied to far fewer than 10 US universities. However, finding those 10, you should thoroughly research at least 15 to 20. When doing your research, you want to look at some of the simple things like the SAT ranges. You also want to look at the location of the school, the model of its curriculum. Is it a liberal arts model, or is it more structured and more specialized? How much does the school cost to attend? What extracurriculars are offered? Are there any unique majors that you might like there? What's the social scene like? Do students live in residence or do they live elsewhere? And after doing this research, you should be able to answer why you want to go to a specific school or why you might not want to go to a specific school. So next, I'm going to move on from school research and go to a sort of related idea, which is the difference between early action, early decision, and restrictive early action. So when you look into schools and top US universities, you'll likely see 3 types of early admission programs. The first one is ED, which is early decision, EA, which is early action, and REA, which is restrictive early action. So the most basic early admissions type is called early action, so EA. It's used by MIT and many other top 50 schools. And you simply apply earlier and receive a decision earlier. You are allowed to apply under EA or early action to as many schools as you would like, as long as they offer early action. And if you are accepted, you are not obligated to attend. The next very common type is ED. And this is something that you'll see a lot in a lot of the Ivy Leagues and other top universities. And ED stands for early decision. It's very popular and it's used by Cornell, Columbia, and UPenn. So you're only allowed to apply to one ED or early decision school, and it is binding. So if you apply, for example, early decision to New York University, if you were to be accepted, you are legally obligated to attend. You can't go anywhere else. Under early decision, you also may not apply to other schools under early action or early decision. So I said that MIT provides early action. If I was to apply to Cornell for early decision, I would not be able to apply to MIT for early action at the same time. I would only be able to do the early decision at Cornell. Also, let's say you do get in. Let's say I applied to Cornell in the early round under early decision, and I was accepted in mid-December. Well, that means that I also have to withdraw every other application that I've already submitted. So early decision should really only be used, or you should only apply to early decision if you know for sure that that is your number one choice. If that is your dream school and you would pick that school over anywhere else, go for it and apply early decision. But don't apply early decision to a school if you're not 100% set and ready to go there. The final, and I think probably the most confusing type, is REA, or restrictive early action. It's used by Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Stanford, and it combines elements from both ED and EA. So under restrictive early action, you may not apply to other early action or early decision schools. So it's similar to early decision in the sense that if you apply REA, or restrictive early action, I can't apply early anywhere else. So when I applied to Harvard early, I was not allowed to submit early applications anywhere else. However, if you are accepted to an REA program or an REA school, you are not obligated to attend. So it's truly just a slightly more restrictive version of early action. For example, if I didn't want to go to Harvard, even though I was accepted early, their program is not binding. So I would be able to go somewhere else if I wanted to. So on this slide, I talked a little bit about research and then ED, EA, and REA. It's just an example of how you can research a school. And I did this with Harvard. So in terms of some basic information, their 50th percentile or median SAT score is a 1510. The acceptance rate is around 3%, and they offer 2 application rounds. Again, as I mentioned, restrictive early action and the regular decision round. In terms of academics, Harvard follows a 2-semester academic year where students take 4 courses each semester. So this works out to 32 courses across all 4 years. And if you were to compare this to many other top schools, this is actually a significantly lighter course load in terms of the number of courses that students are required to take. Harvard also offers a lot of freedom. A third of your classes are curriculum requirements. A third of your classes must be within your major. But for the final third of your classes, you can take whatever you want. Harvard is actually known for being less rigorous academically relative to other top schools. For example, UChicago follows a quartered system. So they have 4 academic terms each year. And each quarter, a student will take 3 to 4 courses. Harvard, however, wants to give students the time and ability to explore all of the opportunities outside of the classroom that the school has to offer. And this is great for someone like me who found the most enjoyable parts of high school to be my extracurricular activities and the things that I've engaged in outside of the classroom. Another thing that is pretty unique to Harvard is that over 90% of undergraduates live on campus for all 4 years of university. So over 90% of students live on Harvard residence for all 4 years. After your first year, you're put into an undergraduate house, and that is where you'll spend the rest of your 3 years. So this is a very unique system that pretty much only Harvard offers. And again, this is just a sample of the types of things you can look for. I can't stress enough how important it is to do this. And it really comes in handy when you have to write essays that are, for example, Harvard doesn't have this essay, but Yale does. Why are you applying to Yale? Things like school ranking, name recognition, and prestige, they're all reasons why Yale is good for everybody. However, in an essay like that, you need to be able to say why Yale is a good fit specifically for you. So if you're a international student or a Canadian student applying to the US, I know that a big concern, especially for parents, when it comes to the Ivy League or top US universities is the price of attendance. I know that it's definitely something that I had to consider. Most top schools have annual fees of around 80,000 US dollars, which is over 100,000 Canadian dollars. Even if you have a lot of money, this is an absolutely unreasonable amount of tuition or living expenses for the majority of people. However, top US colleges and universities, they're aware and they're cognizant of that fact. And they openly state that the sticker price should never be a barrier to attending their school. There are many American universities that are need blind for domestic applicants. However, there are only 7 US universities that are fully need blind for international students. So those 7 schools are Harvard, MIT, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Amherst, and Bowdoin. So Amherst and Bowdoin are liberal arts colleges, so they're not necessarily ranked in the same category as some of the other universities on that list. However, they are still good schools. And I've been reading more and more schools will be transitioning to need blind policies for international students in the future. I believe Brown will be need blind for international students in 2025, but not yet. So if a school has a need blind policy, it means that the university will not take into consideration whether or not you apply for financial aid. These schools also commit to meeting your entire demonstrated need, meaning that they will only require you to pay what they deem you can afford based on your family's financial situation. For example, if you apply to Harvard, they are a need-blind institution. So they don't care whether or not you apply for financial aid or not. If they want you, they'll take you. If you can afford their school, that's not factored into your admissions process at all. So if you were to be admitted to Harvard and you apply for financial aid, you'd have to send in your documents, and then they'd have formulas and they have case officers and things like that who determine how much your family can afford based on your unique financial situation. And this is not just things, this is also income, but things like, do you own other properties? What are your assets? Do you have siblings who are also in school at the same time as you? And then based on that, they'll calculate how much you can actually afford, and you will only ever be asked to pay how much you can actually afford. However, there are also other schools like Stanford or UPenn. I believe UPenn might actually now be need blind to Canadian students. So feel free to check that if you're interested in UPenn. But I know Stanford, for example, is need based, not need blind. So these schools will meet your demonstrated financial need. So in the same way that Harvard, for example, they'll calculate, well, how much can this person afford? However, your decision to apply for financial aid may be considered in your admissions decision. So whether you apply for financial aid, if you cannot afford to go to that school or pay the full sticker price, that could potentially hinder your application. In the case of most of these schools, whether or not you applied for financial aid will rarely be the driving factor in your decision. However, let's say that in all other regards, you are tied with another applicant who can, in fact, pay the entire sticker price while you require financial aid. The other applicant, if everything else is even, might win the spot. So sometimes it's what pushes you over the edge. Just to summarize, the schools listed above are fully need blind. So I highly recommend that you apply to financial aid. If you're thinking of applying to any of the schools on that list on the slide, please apply for financial aid, even if you don't think you can get any. Because at Harvard, for example, they tell everybody on their website, no matter how much money you have or how much money you make, apply for financial aid because it does not impact your admission chances whatsoever. With that being said, I will spend some time addressing some common misconceptions about financial aid at top schools. Firstly, no Ivy League universities offer merit-based scholarships at the undergraduate level. Even recruited athletes, so even if you're playing for the Harvard men's basketball team, if you can afford Harvard, you will have to pay to go to Harvard. So nobody gets money for being smarter or more qualified at the undergraduate level, and all monetary awards are based on financial need. So financial aid is actually very, very common. If you go on Harvard's website, they have something called the net price calculator. And there you'll be able to see that over 50% of undergraduates at Harvard receive financial aid, and more than 20% of Harvard students pay $0. For families with incomes between 75 to 150,000 US dollars, or around 100 to 200,000 Canadian dollars, those families will likely contribute around 0 to 10% of their annual household income every year. This information is publicly available at most schools. For example, you can search up Princeton financial aid data, Yale financial aid data, and you can see all these numbers and how they vary from school to school. But simply put, never let the price of these top US universities be a barrier. Never think that, oh, I'm not going to apply to the school because I can't afford it. Because in 99% of cases for these top US universities, if you are able to gain admission, money will not be a problem. They will make sure they pick the best of the best, and they're willing to pay or help you pay for your schooling in order to have you attend their school. So just the final little thing on financial aid. Many schools have these net price calculators, as I mentioned, and they're very precise. So here I prepared an example, and I've converted these numbers into US dollars just so you can see, because the form online is for US dollars. So if you can see that a family of 4 from Ontario, Canada, with an annual gross income of 200,000 Canadian dollars every year, and with $200,000 worth of cash and liquid investments, will qualify for over 62,000 US dollars, or over 80,000 Canadian dollars worth of financial aid annually. So this would bring your total costs for everything, including tuition, meal plan, and residence, to around 24,000 Canadian dollars if those were your financial circumstances. Excuse me. To put this into perspective, for the Canadians in here, if you're going to study computer science at University of Waterloo, your tuition and books alone, so nothing, no residence, no meal plan, will amount to nearly 20,000 Canadian dollars a year. So I know that I've been talking about this for a long time, but for international students, it's truly one of the most unknown resources at top schools. And when I talk to students in high school, price is often something that is a deterrent. People are often saying, well, it's too expensive. I don't want to apply because I can't afford it. The reality is that the tremendous, generous financial resources that these schools have should not be a deterrent. They should be actually a powerful motivator to apply. So another question that I got a lot was, what classes did I take in high school? And I think if you've attended many webinars related to Ivy League admissions, my course selection might seem a little different than what you usually see. So again, the answer is that there is no one size fits all course selection. There's no courses that you have to take for a certain major. There are no courses that you have to take in order to gain admission to an Ivy League university. And this is because your unique context matters. This means that in terms of courses, you are evaluated according to your circumstances. So earlier I mentioned that I go to a public high school in Ottawa, Canada. It's actually one of the most rural high schools in Ottawa. It's an English public high school. It's non-IB and does not offer any AP courses. So at my school, there are no IB classes or no AP classes offered. And as a result, I never took an AP or an IB class in high school. I followed if any of you are familiar, I followed the standard Ontario curriculum with U-level classes in grade 11 and 12. When you apply, your guidance counselor will submit a school report. So this includes how many students are in your school. If your school does class rank, they'll include that, and all those other contextual pieces that makes your school your school. So when my application reached the admissions office, they saw that my school did not offer APs or IBs, and that I was taking the most rigorous courses available in my immediate context. This means that I was not disadvantaged because of my lack of these courses. Oftentimes when I say this, people don't believe me. So if you don't believe me, there's a quote on the Yale admissions website that says, for example, does your school offer AP courses and IB program? Neither or both. We only expect you to take advantage of IB and AP courses if your high school provides them. So it's very clear, even Yale admissions themselves posted on their website that context matters. So in grades 9 and 10, my course schedule matched the curriculum requirements, so there wasn't too much of a choice. But I've listed here my grade 11 and 12 classes. So in grade 11, I had standard English and math classes. I took all 3 core sciences, so physics, chemistry, biology. I took a social science, accounting, and French. And then in grade 12, I took 3 math classes, so advanced functions, calculus, and data, which is kind of like stats, physics, business management, international business, and French. So you'll notice that even though I applied to economics at Harvard and I was accepted for economics at Harvard, there's not a single economics class there. Again, my school does not offer an economics class, so I was not disadvantaged for that. And at a liberal arts modeled curriculum school like Harvard, where they value exploring different fields and areas of interest, having a course load dedicated specifically to one major isn't as big of an advantage as you might think it is. Another interesting thing that you might see is that I took physics, chemistry, and biology in grade 11, but in grade 12, I only took physics. So I actually did way better in chemistry and biology than I did in physics, but I realized that I wasn't very passionate about them, and my career goals did not involve chemistry or biology at all. So I decided not to take them in grade 12. In Canada, I applied to commerce programs, so I didn't need physics either in reality. However, I liked physics, and my number one advice when it comes to picking courses is to pick the classes that you are interested in, not the ones that you feel obligated to take. Of course, you need to make sure you meet the requirements of your desired Canadian programs, and some US universities will have requirements for specific majors. But with the rest of your classes, I think it is important to definitely take some classes that you would genuinely enjoy. One recommendation that I will make to all students who are planning to apply to top US universities is to study a foreign language in high school. Although it's not a requirement, many top universities recommend that prospective applicants take anywhere from 2 to 4 years of foreign language throughout high school. So if you're in Canada, for most of you, the most readily available option is French. So that's what I did all 4 years of high school. And maybe if you're in the US, Spanish is a common option. I know a lot of students do Latin. I think it's very important that you take this foreign language in school. Even if you are, I know a lot of people in here are Chinese and can speak Chinese very well, but to an admissions officer, that doesn't count. They want to see that you've been taking foreign languages in high school as actual courses. So I just mentioned that I never took an AP class or an IB class, and many people who are in similar settings as I am have asked if my school doesn't offer an AP class, should I self-study one? My advice is that unless you are actually interested in the subject matter of the AP course, I advise against self-studying. If you look online, many admissions officers have actually said that they don't like when students self-study APs solely for the purpose of applying to university, because most of the time students just do it in an attempt to impress admissions officers. It's unauthentic and quite simply not the best use of your time. Admissions officers themselves have said that instead of spending time on APs that your school doesn't offer, you should spend that time on something more useful, like deepening your involvement in extracurriculars, or to focus on the school-related coursework that you actually have. If you are challenging yourself at school and you are doing well, you should have no worries in the course selection regard when it comes to applying to top US universities. I know another question I got a lot in the past was, well, what are my opinions on the IB program? I do want to clarify that just because I didn't attend the IB program and was admitted to Harvard doesn't mean that the IB program is not useful. The IB program is certainly far more academically rigorous than a non-IB school, and it's very effective for preparing you for university. My choice to not attend an IB school was based purely on personal circumstances. The zone of the high school that I fall in, I mentioned that it's quite rural. Means that I live very, very far from the IB sites in my city. It would probably take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour to get to an IB school in my city for me. And I had so many outside of school commitments that I also don't think that first of all, extra time to get to and from school, as well as the extra intensity of the IB program, I don't think that those things would have worked well with my schedule. For example, I mentioned that I do a lot of work in politics surrounding public education in Ontario. And I also am a competitive figure skater. So I'm often out of town. And some months during the school year, this past school year, I missed over 10 days of school in a single month. And in a 4-week month with 5-day school weeks, there are only 20 days of school. So there were some months where I would miss half of the school days. But I was able to catch up and stay on top of my work. And it's not because I'm some sort of genius who doesn't need to study, but it's just because my course schedule was more manageable for me. So if you were at the last webinar that I presented here, I did talk about SAT testing and standardized testing in more depth, but I'll just briefly go over some things. So I self-studied for the SAT and I took it one time in August before grade 12 and I scored 1580, which was 800 out of 800 on the math subscore and 780 out of 800 on the evidence-based reading and writing subscore. In my opinion, the SAT is extremely important as an international student, as it is a standardized measure that can be used to gauge your academic standing and ability. One benefit, for example, of the IB program is that it is an internationally recognized and structured standardized system. So when an admissions officer sees that you've done very well in the IB program, they understand your academic ability. They understand that you are a capable student. A disadvantage of being someone like me, who is in a standard Canadian public high school, is that there is really no way for an admissions officer to compare me academically to an American student. They can't really compare West Carleton Secondary School in Ottawa, Ontario to some sort of high school in California. If you have a mid 90% average, depending on your school, the same performance could be a high 80 or even a high 90 at a different school. There's a lot of variance across school sites, even in the same city. However, if you have a high SAT score, the admissions officer will believe that you are truly a very strong student. Whereas if you have the same academic average, but a concerningly low SAT score, some red flags may be raised around if you are truly as strong of a student as your grades show. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the idea of test optional versus test blind. So you might be hearing that there are many universities now going test optional. And sometimes people get that confused with universities that are test blind. So schools like the UCs, so UCLA, UC Berkeley, for example, are test blind, which means that they do not consider standardized testing in their application system. When I applied to the UCs, for example, there's not even a spot for you to insert your SAT score. It doesn't matter if you have a 1600 or if you have a 1200, they'll never see it and they'll never consider it. However, a test optional school doesn't require you to submit an SAT score, but they will accept and they will factor in your SAT score if you do choose to submit it. So yes, you won't be disadvantaged for not sending in an SAT score. For example, an admissions officer at a test optional school won't go on your file and say, well, they didn't submit an SAT score, we're going to reduce their chances by 10%. However, if you do submit an SAT score that is strong, you have the chance to maybe gain 10%. And by going test optional and not taking the SAT or not taking the ACT, you're throwing away that extra boost that your application could have received if you did indeed submit a standardized test score. And I think especially for international students, with the numbers that are so low, the number of available spots that are so few and far in between, I think you really need to capitalize and you really need to take every single opportunity that you can to increase your chances. And standardized testing is one way to do so. In terms of studying for the SAT, there's not really a right or wrong way. Personally, I self-studied using some SAT books that I ordered on Amazon. I also used some random things I found online, and Khan Academy was a resource that I used a lot. I believe that the list of books I used has been sent out before, but I'm happy to resend it, and I can send it over to Maria Xiaozhang after this, and she can share it in the WeChat. And I think that self-studying is definitely possible, but there were definitely many hours that I could have saved and many things that are harder to learn on your own, like strategy. I know many of my friends took SAT classes and they went on to get admitted and get good scores and get admitted to top schools. Even Gu Ailing, the Olympian who I think goes to Stanford now, took an SAT class in China and she scored a 1580. And I also know people who did a combination of both. They self-studied and supplemented their weak points with third-party sessions. Many SAT classes are very expensive though, so I would definitely recommend doing some form of self-studying, even if you are planning on attending formal classes. In terms of scores, you should aim to be at or above the 50th percentile of the school that you wish to attend. So the table on this slide here has the 25th, 75th, and 50th percentile SAT scores for many top schools. A general piece of advice is that if you score below 1500, you'll want to retake the test. If you score exactly 1500 or maybe 1510, 1520, it's your choice if you want to retake it or not. If you have time, it might not be a bad idea. And if you score at around 1530 or above, you don't really need to retake the test, as if you look at that table, you fall at or above the 50th percentile at almost all of the top schools, just excluding some of the very STEM-heavy schools like MIT and Caltech. So we're going to move a little bit away from academics and then go and talk about activities and extracurriculars. I often see students dedicating a significant portion or almost all of their time to their studies. And studies obviously are what is most important. However, while only focusing on your marks will definitely help you gain admission to Canadian universities, it will significantly hinder your chances at top US universities. In my opinion, extracurriculars are one of the most important pieces of your application because it serves as a good differentiator. So, for example, I like to use this analogy of you have this circle. This circle is the number of people, all the students who have very good marks and very good test scores, they're in this circle. But I'm going to add another parameter. I'm going to add another requirement to stay in the circle. So I need good grades now, a good SAT score, a good standardized test score, as well as very strong activities. And suddenly, once you put that criteria of very strong extracurricular activities, the circle goes from being this big to being this big. And it's a lot easier to gain admission from a pool that is this size than from a pool that is this size. When it comes to what extracurriculars to do, I know this answer doesn't seem helpful, but again, there's no secret formula. My best advice when it comes to extracurriculars is to do things that you're interested in and things that you're passionate about. I mentioned this earlier with AP courses, but admissions officers hate when they see students who do things for the sole purpose of applying to university. It's good to be extremely involved outside of the classroom. However, I believe that why you do something is equally or more important in the admissions process than what you are actually doing. There was not a single activity that I did throughout high school or that was on my finalized US university application that I did not want to do or that I did not enjoy. And if you told me that no matter what, I would not get accepted into any top universities, I would have still done every single one of those things. And to top US universities, what specifically you do doesn't matter nearly as much as, first of all, why you do it, and also how well you do that activity, or how deep you have gone, how far have you explored. A common example I give is debate. I love politics. I've mentioned I did a lot of work and spent a lot of time in the politics of public education, but I never once did debate. I simply wasn't interested in it. This doesn't mean that I think debate is not valuable. I think it's probably one of the best activities if you're looking to develop your public speaking. I think Vivian, who just spoke before me, if you were here for that, she was in debate and she was admitted to many great schools, Columbia, Wharton. But one thing that all of these students have who do engage in debate is that they have passion for it or they are extremely good at it. Oftentimes, I see kids who just join debate or activities like it just because they see that, oh, well, all these people around me are doing it, so I probably have to do it as well if I want a chance of getting in. They might hate it, but they do it just because they feel obligated. Now, debate is just one example. It's the same for anything: music, robotics, Olympiads, or even things that I did, like student government and sports. For example, I don't know how to play the piano or any other instrument, and people are always very surprised when they hear that. I love listening to music, and as a figure skater, artistry is a big part of my sport. However, I just never learned how. Would I like to learn? Sure, why not? But I've chosen to fill my times with things that I'm far more interested in or passionate about. A majority of people I know can play the piano, but while I lack musicality, I've been able to gain skills in other areas. And if you think back to one of the first slides that I showed you today and look at the statistics I gave on applying as an international student, the thing that sticks out the most is how there are so few seats. There are basically no spots for you. It's very hard. Now, if a school like MIT only has 3 seats for students in Canada, do you think they'll give 2 of them to nearly identical applicants? Definitely not. If they have only 3 seats to give, they probably want 3 very different people, 3 people who are very accomplished in different regards. So by copying other people's activities or doing them just because you think they'll look good, you are doing yourself a very big disservice. Also, another thing, and you can see it on the slide, that I think is very important to note is that quantity does not matter. The Common App gives you 10 slots for your activities, and this includes things like jobs and summer programs that you attend. You don't need to fill out all 10. I often see students overextending themselves, trying to engage in every opportunity that is available to them, but this simply isn't feasible or sustainable. And if you spend time trying to balance a myriad of activities, you will never be able to explore any of them deeply. For example, a lot of people who get admitted to top schools are in tons of clubs at school: president of this club, treasurer of this club, secretary of this club. Me, I wasn't involved in many clubs at school. I wasn't in my school's Model UN. I wasn't in the business club. I wasn't in the robotics club or any of those things. But by doing so, I was able to dedicate all of my time to a more select group of activities, which allowed me to go very far in the few paths that I did choose to explore. As I've said many times throughout my webinar, everything depends on you. This image right here shows data released from the Harvard Crimson. You can see here the sheer variety of activities that admitted students participated in during high school. For example, only 44% of students were involved in athletics. I spent a lot of my time as a competitive figure skater, so I would fall into this 44%. But if sports aren't your thing, you don't have to do them. Clearly, a majority of students who do get into Harvard have no athletic or sport-related activities. Again, only 20% did math-related activities. So if math competitions aren't your thing, don't worry about it. And the same can be said about any of those activities there. There's no activity that you have to do. There are no set of activities that you have to do. It doesn't matter what major you're going into, what you want to study, what school you want to go to. There's not a specific set of activities that you have to do or participate in order to be admitted. The bottom line is, as long as you can find something that you're passionate about and that you can show achievement in, you'll be just fine. So if you're in high school and you're already very, very busy, I encourage you all to look at everything you do and ask yourself, if you knew right now, if a genie came out, a fortune teller came out and told you that you wouldn't get into a single top university, would you still engage in those same activities? If you say yes, then you're probably doing the right things. And if you say no to that question, then you need to search for what will make you say yes. So the final thing I'll get into before my Q&A is an application timeline. So I've thrown a lot of information at you today, and you might be a little bit lost on where to start. In terms of a timeline specific to applying to the US, here's my recommendation. If you don't align with this timeline or are quote unquote behind according to this thing that I have on the slide, don't worry. I didn't even start thinking about applying to the US until the end of grade 10. It wasn't something that I grew up wanting to do. I didn't really even know where I wanted to go in Canada at grade 10. So it's certainly not something that you have to start preparing for early, but starting early or starting as early as possible is certainly advantageous and will help you out a lot. I know there were many challenges that I ran into simply because I just didn't think about it early enough. So in grade 9, I only put sort of the 4 years of high school. If you're still in elementary school, maybe try to find some activities. If you're playing some sport, keep playing that sport, but you don't really have to worry about applying to university if you're not even in high school yet. In grade 9, I think it's very, very important to just adjust the high school and to focus on getting good grades, maybe exploring some activities. Don't worry too much about applying. That's still a couple of years away. In grade 10, you're going to want to refine your activities, get rid of the activities you don't like, and explore the activities that you do like further. And again, you always want to make sure you're keeping on top of school. And also, it's important that you start thinking about how you want to spend your summer. One very big difference between students who go to very top universities and students who go to, more average universities is, well, the average student, when summer comes, they might go on vacation. They might spend all their time watching shows on Netflix or just kicking back and relaxing. Whereas a student who is gunning for a top US university will be spending that summer almost like a few extra months of the school year, extra months to further explore their activities, extra months to get ahead in their studies, to study for the SAT and things like that. So while it's important to get a break in the summer is also time that you need to use wisely. And then in grade 11, you want to plan to take your SATs. I think a good target is the spring of grade 11. You want to look at some school research and also, again, how do you want to plan your summer? And then before grade 12, I think the most important part of the application season is the summer leading into the application season. So if I, for example, was going into my final year of high school and I was going to be applying to universities this coming September, this coming October and November, the summer right now, this time that we're in right now is some of the most crucial time. You need to start working on your essays, create a spreadsheet of all the schools you're going to apply to and all the different essays that they have. You want to work on your personal statement for your Common App, finalize your school list. Most of the nitty-gritty application stuff happens in the summer before grade 12. And I think that's very, very important because you don't want to have too much work to do in grade 12, simply because it'll be the school year again. You won't just have US university essays to write, but you'll have an essay in English class, an essay in history class. And it's just important to get a head start. So I mentioned earlier that I would talk a little bit about scholarships. I think that most of the things that I've talked about here across this webinar and this presentation so far can be applied to scholarships in Canada. I like to think of applying to scholarships in Canada like a US university or top university application. And I think that connection and applying the same mindset that I used to apply to Harvard, to apply to the scholarship at UFT or the Lorraine scholarship, I think is what led to me finding such high success in applying to scholarships in Canada. And one thing to think about is applying to the US does give you a very good advantage for scholarships in Canada. Most students here if you're not applying to the US, you don't really have to write essays or anything like that to apply to university. Most of them, you might have to do one small supplementary essay, but for most schools, you just have to submit your grades. Whereas if you're applying to the US, you've gotten a lot of practice, not only writing essays, but also interviewing and creating sort of a persona, creating a strong, compelling application. And those are all things that you can reuse and apply to scholarships in Canada. So I think that you just, again, use the same lessons. It's a process of differentiation. How can you make that circle smaller? Is it through a unique activity? Is it through a unique award? Maybe you have really good essays. Maybe you have really strong recommendation letters, or maybe you have all of the above. And I think that just creating that compelling application, creating that holistic application is how you will get into a top US university. With that being said, thank you all for listening. That's the end of my planned material, and I will pass it back for the Q&A.
Hello, hey everyone. Yeah, let's say thank you to Anton. So next session is a Q&A session, and so let's say thank you to Anton. Everyone. Yeah. Hey, Anton, thank you so much. Yeah, it is a great presentation, right? Is there anybody, everyone agree with that? Please say yes. And let's say thank you to Anton. Please, yeah, let's say thank you to Anton. And now the next step is a Q&A session. And then we will, yes, and we will just go through. Yeah, okay. I will give Anton just 2 minutes to drink some water, and then we will back for the Q&A session, and also we can give some time for the parents for just type your questions, and just I think 2 minutes. 所以各位家长，您可以把您的问题放在这个 Q&A 里边。那我首先有第一个好消息告诉大家，就是我们今天呢给大伙开放了5个名额，这5个名额呢就是可以呢这个跟安童老师来预约一个免费的1对1。大家怎么做呢？你可以拿起你的手机来扫一下整个屏幕的左边的2维码啊，然后这个来填写腾讯问卷，然后同时右边的2维码是我们的小助手微信。我们只有5个名额，所以请大家以敲一为准，说我希望拿到这5个名额，请您呢可以敲一为准啊。好，另外一点呢，我们呢会给大家来简单的介绍一下我们的这个大腾教育啊。Adam 在吗？请达姆帮我啊，这个来介绍一下大腾教育的一个简单的一个啊，这个是我们是达姆在吗？请问达姆在吗？这个帮我对，简单的介绍一下大腾教育啊，我2分钟马上回来啊，2分钟马上回来啊，达腾对，麻烦达姆啊，谢谢。
好的，这样呢我就把这个屏幕给大家分享一下啊，稍等一下各位。好的，给大家简单的介绍一下我们这个大腾教育的一个情况。那么其实我们这个大腾教育应该说是从这个应该是2、3年前之前嘛，我们就已经进行了这样一个服务啊。那么主要帮助到大家的一个内容就是，我相信很多可能家长都不太清楚，就是说这个究竟是怎么样一个情况？就是为什么很多人能上藤校，很多人还不能上藤校？那么如果说呢，已经上过藤校的那些家长朋友，我相信你们都知道这个怎么去做。但是很多没上过藤校的这些家长朋友，可能就会觉得，这到底怎么样去做才能够能够合理的让自己的孩子成功上藤校呢？那么我们有了这样一个服务之后啊，给大家稍等一下，OK， 让我重新分享一下。OK， 好啊。 那么给大家先介绍一下我们这个藤校的一个具体的情况。那么首先第一点，这个我们藤校这个服务内容就是可复制的藤校求学路径。刚才说到了嘛，这个我们很多朋友他可能不知道怎么去上藤校，那么家长这个作为孩子的一个中坚力量，就是能够希望帮助到孩子，也不知道如何去帮助孩子，那么我们就提供这样一个服务，帮助孩子这个学生提升4项硬性成绩及6维的这个软背景啊，把关每一步申请计划，助力成就藤校的梦想。那么应该说我们这个大同教育中心啊，分为这个2个校区，一个是海外校区，一个是中国的校区。那么大家现在此时此刻参加的就是我们这个海外的校区，尤其是我们多伦多这样一个举办的一个活动啊。那么其实我们总共有这个多伦多、温哥华、这个波士顿和伦敦，我们有些这个虽然说是藤校这个直通车啊，但是呢，我们不光是美国的常青藤大学，我们在加拿大，比如说多大如何去申请，包括我们有一些欧洲的学校如何去申请，我们也是这个会帮着大家的。那我们中国校区呢，也是我们这个有同事已经回到了国内去，这个对国内的一些朋友们进行一些这个了解和一些这个应该说是这个信息的一种这个传递吧，就告诉大家，就如果说你想上藤校的话，应该怎么去做啊？那么我们也是有这个大同教育的基金会，有这个徐悲鸿的艺术委员会和这个戴泽的这个艺术基金。然后呢，应该说这个藤校它不是一个，就是说，比如说我们现在可能是一个1-2个月就能够准备完的。正常来讲，如果说你要是想上藤校的话，真正需要做的一件事情就是要从小。如果说您现在想让孩子上藤校的话，尽可能的越早越好啊。那么我们有什么？就是从3年级开始就可以有这个 GIFT 的天才班的一个辅导了。那么同时呢，我们小升书，就比如说这个小 SAT 的辅导和面试，然后这是5年级的，然后7到8年级呢，我们就可以为藤校备跑了。然后这个9年级、10年级和11年级，我们这个为藤校开跑。完成10项全能，然后呢，12年级冲刺藤校尚未能完成，然后呢，这个有8所呀，这个名校申请，包括10月份的这个早录申请啊。那么今天讲到呢，就是这个跟早录申请一个相关的内容。那么我们几乎每一页都会有这个2维码，所以说大家如果说有任何问题的话呢，也可以第一时间扫描我们屏幕上方的2维码进行这个我们如果说有任何问题，可能不太方便在这个 chat 里面问，那么也可以这个扫描我们屏幕上方2维码跟我们这个小助手进行一些询问啊。然后下一个内容就是说，刚才提到了这个4维的硬技能和6维的软技能，也就是我们所谓的10项全能，都包括什么？首先第一点就是我们这个校内GPA 要在90分以上，那么这个是我们这个一个一定程度的一个要求吧。然后呢，我们有 SAT 和 ACT 的一个标准化的测验成绩，以及呢 AP 的课程成绩以及学术竞赛成绩啊。那么有任何问题可以扫描一下左下角的2维码。然后6维的软技能背景啊，这个软技能说句实话，相对来说就比较虚幻一点。那么左上角这个成绩，毫无疑问很硬性，但右下角这个呢，就可能需要大家的这个一些用心去参与了，比如说下校的课程啊，暑期的课程下校，还有这个俱乐部啊、一些公益组织以及音乐体育特长。我们学校呢也为大家准备了这个音乐方面的培训和体育特长培训。音乐我们有这个钢琴方面的和小提琴，体育特长呢我们有这个击剑啊。然后社区的公益社区的义工，还有这个我们这个 research 成绩，还有就是发明创造类的成就，这些东西其实如果说大家有时间的情况，让孩子还是尽可能的去这个多参与。这个在您将来申请学校的时候，其实一个可以占有很重要的一个比重的啊。然后呢，这个我们也算是这个一个大藤名校直通车的一个规划的一个模拟啊。从这样一个角度讲，给大家看一下吧，就是说文商类可选的专业很多，我就不一个一个跟大家去说这个去读了。那么大家可以截个图啊，在对应的这些文商可选的专业呢，进行一个简单的一个了解啊。那么您就可以跟孩子去简单沟通一下，就他感兴趣的专业到底是哪一个。那么应该说兴趣是最好的老师，如果说他不感兴趣的话，可能这个在学习起来会非常非常的这个吃力啊。那么这些专业对应有一些什么学校呢？比如剑桥大学有这个经济啊、这个教育、英语之类的内容啊，包括哥伦比亚大学有什么商业管理史、科学史和哲学，以及我们这个多伦多大学啊。那么应该说，这个哥伦比亚大学、这个剑桥大学、多伦多大学，可以讲就是说，虽然说是藤校，但是我们这个剑桥大学在欧洲，多伦多大学在我们这个加拿大也算是藤校一个。就是说这些学校虽然不能叫美国常青藤大学，但它在学校当中也是整个国际上都有很大的一个这个地位的啊。然后下一个内容就是我们这个文商的一个就业方向。那么，
好了
，OK，
感谢啊，感谢。不好意思啊，各位家长，那个达姆刚才讲的非常棒啊。这个因为正常他是负责我们职业培训的，但是刚才因为我们的那个AI 名师团啊，我们今晚有一个很重要的会议，那些老师他们正好有一点点事情，所以呢，我就请达姆帮了一下忙。没有想到达姆讲的比我讲的还好。好的。感谢啊，好的，过一会儿我们达姆会为大伙儿呢今晚准备一首特别特别感人的一首音乐，我希望所有的家长留下来可以听一下我们的这个音乐的这个环节啊。好的，那而且我今天晚上也特别的高兴，因为我看到有100多位家长还在听，所以今晚我也会给大伙儿增加一个藤妈分享，我自己会分享。 享一下，因为实际上呢，我太忙了，所以好久我都不再分享我自己腾妈的这个经验啊。但今晚我可以呢给大家更多的一些干货。好的，感谢达姆刚才把最重要的一个10项全能呢已经跟大伙儿分享完了。然后另外呢，就是说给大伙儿来看一下这个感谢啊，谢谢达姆。就是说呢，如果我们这个学生交到我们的手中，我们大腾教育，包括我们的安腾老师这一次呢，会非常非常棒，他会直接成为一个导师，带我们的学员。如果您想让您的孩子跟着安腾，然后呢来进行呢整个学业规划的话，现在是最好的一个机会。比如说我们以文商类为例啊，那首先呢选择哪些专业？因为呢专业才对应着大学，不是呢这个说这个大学啊，这个比如说你要经济的话，那肯定是芝加哥大学。然后某种程度上和哈佛大学是齐名的，在经济方面啊。那我们选择完专业以后呢，就是他就业以后会有哪些方向，都会告诉家长。然后另外，这是非常有含金量的一张时间轴，叫时间保姆。安东老师会带着您的孩子啊，比如说 September 就是9年级的9月份开始，每2个星期我们开一次会，然后我们呢开始呢学一批考试，然后我们应该开始我们的 volunteer， 然后我们开始呢计划我们的 summer school， 然后呢开始呢我们的 SAT 的准备，然后这是非常有含金量的一个呢，就是时间轴的这样一个。那另外一点呢，我们大腾的导师呢也会帮助我们的学生把赛事全部准备好，然后比如说每年的1月份有哪些，2月份有哪些，3月份有哪些，我们要商量说，和孩子一起说，咱去打哪个比赛，打哪个比赛，把整个非常枯燥的、非常的这个不容易的爬藤之路变成了像那个升级打怪一样。然后我们这位大藤导师，您试想一下，如果安东老师带着您的儿子或者女儿往上冲的话，那种感觉我相信一定不一样。那我们就是用这种方式啊，安东老师就是我们的大藤导师之一，然后呢来带领我们的这个新一轮的学生。那我们的成功案例啊，哈佛、麻省、耶鲁、普林斯顿，这都是我们的学生获得的 offer 啊。好的，那亲爱的朋友们啊，这个在这里呢，我也想呢为安童老师的妈妈啊，这个尚佳丽教授呢，这个做一个小小的一个呢宣传。因为呢，尚老师呢在4月份的时候来多伦多做过一场线下讲座，然后在所有家长的热情的这个请求下，我们尚佳丽老师培养了安童这么优秀的尚佳丽老师呢，他呢开了一门课程。那这门课程呢就是什么呢？叫做优秀父母提升班、优秀父母呢训练营。那这个课程呢一共有3节课，第一讲呢来铸造有爱的家庭环境啊，所以我听到有关安童成长过程中各种各样的真的让人听得特别开心的故事。第2讲个人目标和社会责任的有机结合，第3讲精神健康。那我们这门课程呢，这个尚佳丽老师是非常有爱心的一位老师，他基本上办公益送给大家，然后每节课我们都是呢这个2个小时，一共是6个小时的课，原价499含税。今晚呢我们只有3个名额是299含税。如果您想上尚佳丽老师这门课的话，可以加一下我们大腾教育的负责人，然后我们的非凡，然后呢跟他讲说尚老师的课我想跟着来报一下。那我们呢这个大家也可以直接打电话41666518888，或者 EMP 转账 ivexpress.info@gmail.com 啊。然后呢如果是美国的朋友，您可以直接 Zelo 转账 Tower Marketing， 然后 corp@gmail.com 好吗？所以呢这是我们第一个今天的好消息。第2个好消息呢，就是我刚才告诉大家的，我们的安童老师愿意这一轮因为他9月份在哈佛开始读书，学业会非常紧张，他最多只能带2个孩子做1对1的学业升学规划，然后呢加本每本的申请。我来告诉大家一个小小的秘密啊，安童老师呢他在高中2年级的时候，他曾经辅导了他的一个特别好的朋友拿到了哈佛大学的 offer。 你说这个孩子是多么神奇的一位老师。所以呢大家最后再一次机会，如果您希望呢就是安童老师有一个每个孩子15分钟到半小时的一个1对1的升学这个规划免费讲座，如果大家呢想这种1对1跟安童老师聊的话，您可以拿起手机扫一下整个屏幕左右边的2维码，填写腾讯问卷，请您把这个机会留给7年级以上的孩子。然后呢您也可以呢扫完了以后一定要加左边的这个小助手回复说安童老师，然后我们就会帮你预约。因为呢他也只有在9月份开学之前，然后这一点点 不到1个月的时间，所以呢，我们只有这个5个名额，大家呢可以这个敲1为准这个最后再一次给大家这样一个机会。好的，那我们呢这个就是我把时间呢下面呢要交给安童老师回答一下问题因为他也特别忙。然后呢，安童老师讲完呢，回答完问题之后呢，刚才我承诺大家，虽然今晚我特别忙有几部分工作同时进行，但是我还是想呢，为大家做一个腾妈的分享来给大伙儿介绍一下，就是女儿的成长经历因为她是拿到了哈佛、麻省、耶鲁、普林斯顿伯克利几所大学的 offer， 然后呢，她到底就是女儿做过什么就是这个也是呢，这个还是比较多的一些20多页干货吧，这都是我自己今天刚刚准备出来的一些全新的内容希望能够跟家长和孩子们分享一下。那亲爱的小伙伴们，那我们现在把时间交给安童老师，有一个大约呢，这个看看安童老师的时间，5到10分钟的答疑So I think now it's our the next session. It's a Q&A session. So Anton, are you here? Yes. Wow, great. Yes. And so Anton, you can pick up. I can see there are tons of questions. I think you can pick up the top 3, the most regular questions, and you can answer them. And okay, thank you. Q&A and chatting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll skim over and see which 3. First one. So question, could you share more of your personal achievements that you think are important for getting Harvard offer? So I think when it comes to my assumptions as to why I was admitted to Harvard, I always break it down into 3 sections. So activities, personal traits, and academics. So when it comes to activities, I think in high school, I spent far more time involving myself extracurricularly as opposed to involving myself academically. I mentioned that I was a competitive figure skater, and throughout high school, I consistently skated 5 to 6 times every week and have competed at the national level. I was also did some other stuff in the skating realm, like I was a volunteer skating coach and some other stuff like that. And my other main activity was work in education policy and education advocacy. In my province's legislation, there is a position called student trustee, where you sit on the governing board of a school district. So the rest of the board is composed of municipally elected adult trustees and senior staff like superintendents and the director of education. I was a student trustee for the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, and this school board oversees over 75,000 students in roughly 150 schools. So at that level, I went to a lot of meetings, led a bunch of projects, worked on a lot of policy at the school board and things like that. In addition to that, I also did a lot of stuff in education advocacy at the provincial level as the vice president of the Ontario Student Trustees Association, which represents roughly 2 million students across 4,500 schools in publicly funded education in Ontario. And in that work, we worked very closely with the Ministry of Education and other stakeholder groups in things like curriculum development, curriculum reform, student transportation, equity projects, and other things like that. Although I think those were probably the 2 biggest contributors to my activities. And I also think that my activities were one of the biggest driving factors in my admission. So that's section number 1. And then section number 2 is what is often referred to as personal traits. So it's things that show who you are beyond your academic and extracurricular accomplishments. So things like essays and recommendation letters. I received very strong recommendation letters from my teachers. And I think that recommendation letters are probably one of the most important pieces of the application, as your entire application is you talking about yourself. You're talking about why you deserve a spot at this university. However, the recommendation letter is one of the rare times when it's somebody else talking about why you deserve to get in. And it's very important that you can find someone who will say, this student was one of the best students I've ever had, and you need to take them. You want to find someone who will fight for you in the recommendation letter like that. And also, I believe my essays were very strong. They tied very well into who I was as a person. And I even received an email from my admissions officer after I was admitted to Harvard, and they specifically mentioned a couple of my essays and mentioned that they really liked reading them. So I think that those were also a big piece of why I was admitted. And then the final part, which is the academic section, it's the pretty standard. I had good grades throughout high school. In all across high school, I think my average, came out to around 98%. I think in grade 12, my average was 98.5%. As well as that, I had a high SAT score. Again, high academic performance and high academic achievement is not really a differentiator, but it's sort of the baseline. It's something that you need to have. But I do think that my good grades and SAT score did show Harvard that if they did admit me, I would be able to handle their academic environment. Next question. Let's see. Okay, I see a question sort of loosely related to activities. It says, one question is, if a student is not interested in one type of math competition, in brackets, his high school promotes this math competition, but likes another type of math competition and got a very good score, how should he explain that he is not in the school math club? Well, I think the reason I will pick this question is I think it relates to a very common misconception around a lot of activities. And the thing is, you don't need to, he doesn't need to explain why he's not in the school math club. I think a good way to look at this is if I'll assume that maybe he's your son. So if this student has a very strong score in all regards in the AIME math competition, and he's being compared to a student who is in his high school's math club, but who doesn't have a high math score. Well, if I want to pick somebody or give them points for being good at math, who am I going to pick? Am I going to pick the kid who actually did good in a math competition and who is clearly very proficient and very strong at math? Or am I going to pick the kid who just joined the math club? I think the choice there is pretty obvious. I would want to go with the kid who had the high math score, who actually did something in that regard. And I think that that's very important. A lot of people join activities because they think that they have to join them, but then within those activities, they don't accomplish anything. Whereas this student who would be taking sort of something that's not related to their school necessarily, but doing well in a math competition on his own, that's him going into an activity and doing well. And I think that that's worth a lot more than just joining a club and saying that, oh, I'm in the math club kind of thing. Someone asked, what were my essays about? I think that this is a very big thing in the application process. The essays are probably one of the most important, if not the most important part of your application. And again, it's because these top schools, they admit people. They don't admit accomplishments. They don't admit A's. They admit the student who achieved those things, the person who got those good grades. And you can't really tell those, the traits that make you who you are as a person. Yes, included in that package are the things that you've engaged in and the things that you've accomplished, but things like your personality also build into who you are as a person and are probably some of the more important pieces of who you are as a person. And by submitting your grades or submitting your activities, you can't really get a sense of who you are specifically as a person. And I think that that's where the essays come through. A lot of my essays were just focused on showing how what would it be like to have an actual conversation with me? What would it be like to spend a day with me? And I think that when it comes to picking your essays, it's very, very important to pick the things that show who you are as a person. And it's important to avoid some very common mistakes, such as just writing an essay about your biggest accomplishment or something like that, because in those cases, you're just wasting space. You don't want to write an essay just about one specific activity, because that activity is already on your activities list. That essay is better spent, that space on your application is better spent on something that you haven't talked about. How can you, craft that full picture? You want to use your essays to tie together those different pieces of your application in broad terms, my personal statement, I did talk about figure skating, and figure skating was kind of central to my personal statement. However, I didn't talk about skating itself. I sort of used figure skating as a vehicle to show how I grew as a person and how my personality sort of developed alongside figure skating. And again, you need to sort of do a lot of deep reflection to think about what topics, what ideas will get across who I am as a person, and what ideas are central to who I am as a person. And those are the things that you should write about. But obviously that's a very challenging thing to do. But it's definitely very needed if you want to score major points with your essays. Okay, those are my 3 questions. I think I'm out of time. I'll pass it back to Maria Xiaozhang and just say another big thank you to Victoria School and to Maria Xiaozhang for having me as usual. And everybody have a good night. Thank you.
Anton, thank you so much. And hopefully in the near future, if you happen to Toronto, please let me know. I need to treat you a big meal, and you help us twice already. And each time it's a great presentation. I have got tons of message already, and everybody say thank you for the awesome seminars, and we got a lot. So thank you so much. And hopefully, if you go to Harvard September, let me know. I will ask Ruby treat you a meal. Invite you to have a dinner for sure. I told Ruby already. I said, yeah, one of a great brother will go to Harvard in September something. And if Anton there, please bring him and invite him have a dinner together. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so everyone just let's say thank you to Anton, and we keep on going. 好的，那各位家长，大家听到了安童刚才做了一个非常完美的一个答疑啊。那同样就是这么好的、这么优秀的一位导师，将为大家带来呢1对1的孩子们的1对1的职业规划，升学规划，包括呢，如果您觉得孩子真的是需要这样每2周的一次呢这个引领的话，那我也希望您可以选择我们大藤教育的大藤教育的这样一个呢这个规划。另外一点呢，安童老师的妈妈尚佳丽教授的优秀父母提升班，我也希望您能够呢来参加这个课程。其实只有299含税，去掉税以后也只有200多块钱啊，这是维多利亚可能最优惠的一门课程。但实际上呢，它对孩子的帮助是巨大的，因为想培养优秀的孩子，父母首先要能够是一个优秀的父母啊。好的，那如果大家有兴趣，可以加一下我们大藤教育的2维码。那下面呢，我希望有大约10分钟的时间来跟大伙儿分享一下我们这个哈佛腾妈的分享，我自己的一些心得和体会啊。这个谢谢热情的家长们，大家都在感谢啊。这个安童老师，好，那我自己呢介绍一下女儿的情况。然后女儿呢是 Ruby 啊，其实很多人很熟悉 Ruby 啊。Ruby 呢中学是多伦多大学附属中学啊，在多伦多这边。然后呢，她在考大学的时候呢，这个美国这边我们拿到了3所藤校的 offer， 但最终我们选择了芝加哥大学。为什么选择芝加哥大学呢？因为芝加哥大学的经济是全世界啊大学当中呢排名数1数2的。他同时在芝加哥大学读了经济、数学、统计、布斯商学院4个专业，最后呢他以4门呢接近满分啊，这个3.97，4分满分嘛，拿到呢就是芝加哥大学创校以来啊1875年创校以来的3个最高荣誉大奖啊。所以他在2019年呢获得了哈佛大学直读博士前，2021年是哈佛大学全奖博士生啊。其实 Ruby 呢，她的成长呢和很多人有一点不一样，不一样在哪里呢？就是其实她是经历过人生的一个很大的一个打击啊，我一直认为一个优秀的孩子，就像安童刚才所说的，并不是说上藤校就一定说哎你会特别的厉害啊。实际上呢，我觉得我的分享是想告诉大家，不一定是所有的孩子都需要上藤校，也不是所有的孩子啊的确这个没那么容易啊都能上藤校。但是我们作为每一个家长，我们都希望我们的孩子能够优秀，希望我们的孩子能够幸福。那对于孩子来讲，什么叫真正的幸福？其实想一想，我们大人什么是我们的幸福？那就是我们把我们的潜能最大的发挥出来，然后我们在给予的过程当中，你就感受到了我们自己生而为人的对这个社会、对身边朋友的这种奉献的幸福和开心。所以呢，家长怎么样能把孩子最大的潜能发挥出来？我觉得这是最重要的啊。 就是 Ruby 呢，她在大学2年级的时候呢，其实就是我们母女俩经历了人生第一个重大的打击啊，就是说呢，这个她的父亲，也就是我先生呢，突然癌症去世。其实呢 ，Ruby 在她9年级的时候呢，就是我先生就已经呢是查出来有癌症，然后呢，他经历了我们全家经历了差不多10年抗癌的这样一个这个生活，然后在大学2年级呢，没有想到啊，就是父亲突然去世，所以在大学2年级那年暑假呢 ，Ruby 呢，他就放弃了，他拿到了投行的这个就是 summer 的这个 intern 啊，他就放弃了优厚的工作啊，当时薪资付得很高，然后他顶着烈日采访呢难民和寻求庇护者，因为他一直牢记父亲告诉他呢，就是一定要用你所学的知识去帮助其他人，这才是一个名校毕业生应该去做的一个事情。好，然后他做出数据分析，希望帮助社会中的弱者。那大3时候呢，他就开始跟着教授呢做研究，荣获费贝塔全美历史最悠久的社会学学术荣誉大奖啊，同时在斯坦福大学本科经济杂志发表论文啊。其实呢，我觉得就是这些才是呢一个孩子他能够真真正正的就是走向优秀的第一条道路，就是怎么样能够用所学的知识去帮助到让这个社会更加美好啊。那大学4年级的时候，刚才我已经讲了 ，Ruby 呢就是荣获1890年啊芝加哥大学的 Student Marshall 啊。其实这个奖项，如果孩子有机会去美国读大学，我会建议呢，他们都应该把这个奖项呢作为一个目标，因为每一个学校都有自己的 Student Marshall， 相当于总统大奖啊，是非常有含金量的。微观经济奖和论文奖，最终呢，他就是获得了这5所大学的全奖博士 offer 啊。那去年8月份呢，我特别欣慰的是，女儿呢在哈佛参研的2篇论文在自然杂志上正式发表啊，这个是我觉得其实评价一个孩子他的 research 能力和他的创造力，就是你能够在国际期刊，尤其像 Science 啊 Nature 啊，就这种啊，就是说是非常重要的国际杂志，含金量非常高的，实际上是非常有价值的啊。那这个我希望呢，就是我的分享能够让大家呢包括我们自己，我们母女2人啊，成长的过程当中呢，能够让大家体会到一句话，叫黑夜给了我们黑色的眼睛，但是我们用它来寻找光明。希望呢，我们每一个家长都能够帮助自己的孩子建立起永远不放弃、永远前行这种呢精神力量和内驱力。我写过2篇文章，一篇文章呢是写的呢就是母亲负责人格力量的培养。然后另外一篇文章写的是父亲负责呢这个智力的开发和纪律的养成，大家可以扫一下整个屏幕右下角的这个二维码，这是我个人的二维码，回复文章2个字，我就把文章发给您。因为今晚呢时间比较紧张一点啊，然后我这边呢这个不断的有这个我的员工啊这个进来说校长这边还有事情，所以呢我没有办法分享很多，大家可以看我这2篇文章，讲到了很多呢这种有关情商，作为父母啊情商方面的一些内容，希望对大伙有帮助。那怎样给大伙一点干货，怎样让孩子爱上学习？第一，帮助孩子建立自信，我觉得这是最重要的一点，就是作为父母啊，就是说你会发现你帮他建立的自信将对他一辈子都是受益匪浅。那其实每个孩子呢，他的这个就是弱项，没有完人，每个孩子都有他的弱项，然后呢尤其在他就是不自信的地方，帮他建立自信。女儿呢，她其实呢数学特别好，就她数理化特别好，学习成绩特别好。她从小学到现在啊，她在哈佛读博士啊，她的数学基本上都是100分啊。然后但是呢，她呢没有办法呢，就是像我这样特别会讲话。然后我们家的话都让我说了啊，她是比较内向、比较害羞的一个孩子啊。所以呢，在10年级的时候呢，就是我就大力的鼓励她去参加 DECA， 就是中学生商赛。在加拿大这边呢，有2个很重要，就整个北美，一个是 DECA， 一个是 SOMA。然后呢 SOMA 很多人知道是叫做模拟联合国，那 DECA 是什么呢？ DECA 呢就是呢这个给大家呢这个相当于是做这个就是商赛。那女儿呢10年级我就鼓励她，我们叫口含石子面向大海，这个讲话列宁的这种精神，然后呢国王的演讲啊这种精神，最后呢她是 DECA 获得了加拿大的这个第1名，代表呢加拿大到美国参赛，获得了 International 的第2名啊。然后从这件事情之后呢，我觉得 孩子的眼神都变了，就是他在这方面特别自信。所以今年下半年呢，这是马上9月份开学，他就要给哈佛本科生呢做 TA， 然后有一门课是150名啊，就是这个大班是150多个哈佛经济学的本科生啊。然后呢，我说你紧张不紧张？然后他说哎呀，妈妈，如果没有10年级代卡竞赛的那个训练，他说估计会很紧张，但现在他就很有自信。你看这个是非常重要的啊。那另外呢，兴趣是最好的老师。有一件事情特别明显，就是学中文啊。学中文呢，很多家长跟我就是抱怨说，哎呀，我的孩子不讲中文呐。你看刚才安童也讲中文啊 ，Ruby 呢是这个，他实际上是不到1岁来加拿大，然后但他的中文呢，听说读写都没问题。那他是怎么学的呢？你要建立起他兴趣来。我不知道有多少父亲可以做到这一点。我们当时为了让女儿学中文呢，他爸爸呢把全套的金庸全集全部注上汉语拼音，因为呢他会汉语拼音，但他不认字。但是呢，因为有这个兴趣，他去读金庸小说，然后所以呢，这个他能够呢看下去，他特别想知道，哎，最后呢杨过和小龙女有没有重合啊？但他读完呢《天龙八部》啊，然后这是非常非常人物特别复杂的一部这个武打小说，然后看完了呢《笑傲江湖》，这是人性特别复杂的一部武打小说啊。然后我就说他可以读《论语》了，他可以把《论语》读出来。所以呢，兴趣是最好的老师啊！我希望做父亲的，然后来问自己有没有对孩子付出这么多啊。另外呢，很多人忽略了传统文化在家庭教育中的重要性。那传统文化都有什么呢？就是比如说，第一个是节俭。那节俭呢，实际上是非常重要的。女儿身上这件大衣，9年级爸爸给买的，现在还穿在身上。因为只有当一个孩子，他把他的注意力从什么呢？从一个物质的这种享受转化成对于精神层面的这种呢这个追求的话，他才有可能啊做出来更大的成就。那第二点就是心怀感恩啊，这个呢要给孩子看很多有关历史的书，有关宇宙的书。他有一颗这个就是非常的这个宽大的胸怀的时候，他心怀感恩，他就能够做出呢更大的一些成就。最后一点是我最喜欢的传统文化，曾国藩家书啊，结硬宅，打呆仗。刚才呢，其实我们的 Adam 给大伙介绍什么叫硬宅，很多家长到处学，你就扎扎实实的4项硬技能，行就是行，不行就是不行，成绩好就是好，不好就是不好。所以呢，这4项成绩说什么也要补上去。第一条就是校内的 GPA 成绩啊，要90分以上至少啊。然后呢，第二条 SAT 成绩或者 ACT 成绩至少应该，安童是1580，1600分满分嘛。当时 Ruby 呢，我记得我女儿是当时他们是2400分满分，她是2300，我忘记是多少啊，就是反正是接近满分。然后呢，你可以2250，应该呢过了标准。10年级我们当时第一次考试考过了，我们就再也不用去想 SAT 的事情了。所以这个是一定要考上去的。AP 怎么地？如果你要考呢，比如说数学呀、经济的，至少5门以上。如果你是沃登商学院，你可能2门 maybe OK， 但是至少是5分。然后呢，学术竞赛，其实竞赛是非常非常不容易的一件事情啊，因为竞争太激烈。然后我们当时呢，这个真的是做了大量的研究，最后我们找了一个比较容易拿成绩的，就是化学竞赛。其实他数学很好，但我们没敢去碰这个数学，因为呢，数学呢就是竞争太激烈。化学呢，后来女儿是进了国家队啊，当然这个我们起步有一点点晚，然后呢，所以呢就是没有最后说是拿到这个成绩啊，但是也算可以写到 application 上啊。那另外呢，就是结硬宅、打呆仗，就是这6项软技能。Summer School 非常重要啊！女儿当时是 Shadow Valley、Deep River、Smith College， 然后每一个 Summer School， 她最后她的大 essay 其实就是她呢在 Deep River 当时呢他们做的研究，然后写出来的，怎么克服困难，非常有意思啊。然后另外呢，就是你的 club 呢，你要自己组建 club， 你要在里边是 ED executive， 对吧？然后呢，这个不能是一个，就是说在里边一个会员。再另外呢，音乐体育特长，这是为什么呢？我们会有音乐学院，为什么会有击剑？就是希望给孩子这块弥补上。击剑是最容易拿到出成绩的一个体育特长。然后我们自己呢，就是我们击剑馆培养了一个 Alex， 也做过讲座。他来讲呢，就是他是连续3年加拿大的击剑总冠军青少年组，所以他11年级就获得了西北大学的早录 offer。 另外呢，社区义工就是 volunteer 啊，就是 volunteer。然后呢，另外呢，你的 research 成绩啊，这个社区义工呢，你要不能让孩子随便到麦当劳打工啊等等，要和他将来申请的要有关系才可以。比如说他要申请商学院 ，Wharton 商学院，那他的 volunteer 就应该和 business 方面相关，对吧？他将来要去读医学，他的 volunteer 就应该呢，比如说和生物有关系啊等等啊。那 research 和发明创造力这2项是最难的，别说孩子，我们成年人都没有办法去发明一个啥。那怎么办呢？所以我们这2项最后在去年找到了一个解决方案，就是我们请呢 UCL， 就是伦敦大学的博士后，然后呢他发表了100多篇国际论文，而且在3个国际期刊上做总编，陆遥教授来给我们讲什么呢？来讲呢就是中学生如何在国际期刊上发表论文。大家注意了啊，他将在9月10号星期天的下午5点钟多伦多时间做一场公益讲座，因为有5个小时时差嘛，所以是5点钟，大伙儿记下来这个时间啊，就专门讲这个就是怎么样发表论文啊，所以这个是呢，就是我认为呢是非常重要的。然后另外呢，这个在这里呢也快速的啊，就是跟大伙儿讲一下，比如说基建啊，大家如果有兴趣说，我们荣耀基建馆、万锦和密西沙加全部呢都有馆啊，大家可以扫一下基建的小助手啊。另外呢，这是大藤教育啊，刚才已经介绍了很多有关大藤教育，2条战线，一条战线补单科补 SAT 呀，然后补 AP 呀，另外一条战线就是比如说安童老师做的这种啊，每2周一次呢科学的规划。然后另外呢，这个还是忍不住讲一句，维多利亚教育集团很多成年人说，校长，我当年就是跟着你找到工作的，为什么现在你做了这么多青少年呢？我想告诉大家一句实实在在的话，估计现在主要都是家长在听我讲，那就是呢，我们这一代人，我认为就这样了。什么意思呢？我们能做的就是呢，给我们的孩子插上腾飞的翅膀。怎么去插上这个腾飞的翅膀呢？那就是我们这一代要全力以赴的多赚钱，找好工作，然后房地产或者投资多赚钱，然后让我们孩子接受最好的教育，因为最好的教育是需要呢有一个财富作为呢后盾的。这个我讲的特别实在啊。这个因为呢，像今天那个薇薇是拿到全奖，然后呢，这个安童是拿到30万加币的奖学金。毕竟呢，不是所有的孩子都能够呢这么容易拿到这么高的一个奖学金啊。那维多利亚这边呢，我们就是职场学院帮大伙找好工作，地产学院、创业学院，周1到周日1周7天，然后1、3、5的晚上叫小灶课，职场小灶课都是晚上8点，2、4、6的晚上讲地产，然后呢讲投资。然后周日晚上我们基本上是讲藤校啊，然后讲移民呐，然后呢讲基建呐，讲音乐，基本上都是青少年的，好吧？大伙儿呢一定记着上线，就今晚这个号816853400181啊。好，那我们呢这个下面呢就是我要给大伙介绍一下家长应该怎么做，别让平凡的生活耗尽我们所有的向往。愿你我忠于自己，披星戴月培养最好的子女啊。然后这2篇文章大家如果想读，可以加一下我的个人的2维码。那我首先呢，作为家长，您准备好了吗？每个孩子的成功都是被设计出来的。推荐大家去读一个纪录片，这个纪录片呢叫做《人生7年》，全世界最著名的教育题材的纪录片之一。我当时看完这个纪录片之后呢，我觉得我的眼角都是湿润的。整个这个拍摄团队真的是太值得赞扬了，他们花了大量的财力和人力，然后做了一件有意义的事情，从60年代跟踪拍摄到21世纪，7岁的孩子变成63岁的老人，一共拍了14个孩子，最后得到了2个重要的信息。他拍了这么多，哪2个重要的信息？第一个，教育是改变阶层固化的唯一方法，而父母就是孩子的起点。所以呢，我希望大家啊，不是说呢，这个真正的起点不是学区房，不是经济条件，也不是多少辅导班，而是父母要做到如下3点。哪3点呢？这3点做到了，最平凡、最普通的父母同样可以培养出最懂事、最上进、最优秀的孩子。第一点，充分挖掘孩子的潜力。我们永远想把最好的留给孩子。什么是最好的？什么是最重要的礼物？就是呢，帮他们发展出他们本来认为自己不可能具备的能力，从而挖掘出自身的潜能，让他们知道，就是说呢，如果我想让我做成一件事情，梦想成真，我要用什么方法，付出怎样的努力啊？然后这是呢第一点。然后第2点，人生必须有目标，因为呢，包括为了达成目标的奋斗和坚持。因为呢，爬藤从9年级开始爬，不是一个短跑，是一个马拉松。所以呢，大家呢，就是而且这个目标呢，不能是容易达到的，一定是上坡路的目标。 就是说呢，你会发现你越痛苦的时候，是因为你在走上坡路。所以希望家长能够帮助孩子确定一个正确的目标，不要说我很佛系啊，我觉得无所谓啊，不是的，家长呢就是要让孩子知道走到山顶会有怎样的一个这个风景。那最后一点呢，永远把教育放在第一位。我希望呢，叫做教育决定阶层，决定命运啊！我们的孩子，大家记下来。我特别喜欢这句话，属于明天，属于我们做梦也没有办法达到的明天。我们唯一能做的，我们这一代人就是给他插上腾飞的翅膀，让他们在梦想的天空中翱翔啊！希望家长，如果您做不到，说我自己具备帮孩子爬藤的学识，我希望您可以把孩子交给我们啊，我们一起努力。好，那我们呢，这两句话也是希望留给大家。这些呢，全部都是我们大藤教育的导师啊。你看 Jenny 呢是哥伦比亚大学的早录法学院，她呢在今年的9月份已经呢成功的入职纽约全世界最大的 cooperation 的 law firm， 是最年轻的亚裔的女律师啊。然后这个是茱莉亚呢是同时获得芝加哥大学Booth 商学院 MBA 以及医学院的这个博士，他的时间管理真的是让人非常吃惊的啊。那我希望呢有2份家长们记下来，永久的遗产留给我们的孩子，一个是根，一个是翅膀。什么是根？面对困境的信念。翅膀是什么？适应困境的能力。其实我为什么呢对女儿呢我觉得非常的满意，就是呢我觉得我把根已经留给她，无论她这样在漫长的一生当中遇到多大的困难，我相信经历过在大学2年级父亲去世的这件事情之后，他能够呢这样勇敢的面对，并且坚持自己的梦想，最终实现他自己和父亲共同的目标，进到哈佛。我相信呢，这就是我们留给他的根。那翅膀是他适应困境的能力，这才是我们留给孩子一生的宝贵的财富。那亲爱的朋友们，希望大家在这个父母守望的麦田里，这是第2部电影，叫《守望的麦田里》。我们的孩子可以长得饱满又金黄，结出最甜美的果实啊！那另外呢，如果您还不知道如何规划孩子的未来，还会在山脚下，我们呢希望帮您走到山腰，看得更远。如果孩子已经在山腰了，那我们一起帮助他，托举他走到山顶，好吗？成功的路只有一条，那就是准备再准备啊！所以今天呢，那我最后再一次把这个名额送给大家，一共有5个名额，可以跟我们的安童，包括我刚才介绍这么多优秀的大藤导师进行1对1预约，大家可以填码，扫这个预约2维码，然后另外呢，小助手微信大家可以这个看一下然后最后机会大家可以加一下我们小助手微信，同时也能获得每个月的最后一个周日晚上我们的讲座那我们呢8月份提前预告是周日晚上8点钟将会给大伙儿来讲 AA 族裔细分法。大伙儿可能不知道这真的是一个大快人心的一件事情，就是呢美国所有的这些大藤已经废除了，就是说哪一个族裔只能拿多少人进来今年哈佛的亚裔的录取率高达29%，这个比率会越来越高，所以这是一个大好消息。我希望所有梦想的家长们趁着这股东风，把我们的孩子送进藤校。所以呢，我们的利维亚老师特别有经验，康奈尔大学的双硕士，将为大伙儿来分享，就是亚裔的爬藤策略要有哪些变化呢？Zoom ID 8168534018好的，亲爱的朋友们，感谢大家的聆听。那我呢，今天我的藤妈分享虽然简短，但是跟大家呢已经呢做了一个飞快的一个分享。好的，那最后呢，这个我要把一首音乐送给大家那这首音乐是什么呢？是一个有故事的一个音乐这个音乐呢，实际上呢是去年因为我在去年呢，我是8月27号有700多人参加了我的婚礼我特别感谢我的女儿 Ruby， 她呢带着她60多位呢哈佛的和麻省的博士生会来参加我的婚礼这个整个婚礼都是2个女儿我的先生麦克呢，然后现在的先生他呢也是8年前失去了这个太太然后呢他的女儿是多伦多大学医学院的高材生牙医，然后呢和我的女儿 Ruby 共同给我们主办了我们的订婚和我们的结婚那在这个情况下呢，我和 Ruby 在前年就是 Peter 这个去世4周年的时候，麦克老师呢他剪了一段这个呢视频，然后包括呢这个我们的音乐学院的 Amanda 老师给我们专门配了1个月，特别感动啊！我希望大伙儿可以留下来感受一下这份感动。那我们呢，下周周一到周日啊，这个周一到周日我们的共学营预告告诉大家啊，周一晚上，明天晚上，所有的家长们一定不要错过。我们固定每周一晚上8点整，将为大伙儿带来 AI 的大讲堂 ，AI 炙手可热，人工智能炙手可热，大家一定不要错过。来自我们廖老师的 AI 在日常生活各行各业中的应用，明晚8点整啊，我们准时不见不散。周二晚上会来我们的收纳女神来讲大家呢如何3招教我们把家整理的漂漂亮亮，出租卖房子拿一个高价的 offer 啊。然后呢，我们的悠悠老师，那我们周3晚上是我们会计求职必知的10大面试技巧，周4晚上是我们建豪宅如何省时省钱啊，李文杰老师建筑泰斗啊。周5晚上是我们的 AI 第2讲，最新的 ChatGPT 插件，然后呢 Code Interpreter， 然后呢到底怎么样能够让我们呢要么掌握它，要么被代替啊，太神奇了啊！这个他用我的一张照片2分钟做了一个校长机器人，很多人都说校长到底是你真人在讲还是机器人在讲啊？那我们周六晚上我是我们的珠宝讲座，然后来教所有的人能够3个月制出自己的戒指啊、胸坠啊，然后呢胸针呐，然后呢这个非常棒啊。周日晚上就是永远不会被 AI 取代的黄金职业，我最喜欢的 Frank 老师，6大上市公司的这个财务总监来讲财务分析师，好吗？好，亲爱的小伙伴们，那我呢这个再一次感谢大家。另外8月6号呢，也在嘉东上午11点，我们在皇家庄园举办了一个维多利亚教育集团24周年的师生同乐会，也欢迎大家来参加啊！大家也可以加我们的小助手来参加这个活动，好吗？好的，那我现在就要把时间交给我们的Adam 啊，然后他会给大伙播放一下今天晚上的晚安音乐，也就是我们的麦克老师，然后呢为我们剪辑的，送给亲爱的爸爸妈妈们。好的，谢谢大家。那我们明天晚上8点不见不散，然后8月份的最后一个周日晚上不见不散。谢谢亲爱的家长们，感谢。好，大木，我把时间交给您，谢谢。